Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, the setup of the INCRA finger jointing jig on the router table. Now, as some of you know, I did a little bit of a tutorial and an assembly and a demonstration of using the INCRA I-box, or their finger jointing jig. And there was some comments made where the dado blade is not available in some regions, and one of those regions would be the UK, in which case I thought it's a perfect time to step in and do a tutorial video on exactly how you can use the INCRA I-box with your router table. So before we can get the process of setting up the INCRA jig on the router table, the first thing you want to do is remove your stock fence. Well, the first thing that you need to do whenever you move the jig to a new station is you need to set the home position. And what that means is that this little set screw that's in the middle of this red arm has to be lined up in the middle of this etched line that's in that knob. So it's very simple to do. All you need to do is loosen this black set knob on top of your jig, hold your red knob on the side here, and then rotate your silver knob until that set screw is lined up right in the middle of that etched line. Once you have that set, what you need to do is get these silver pin plates together. So I've removed the guard just to show you for clarity, and we're going to rotate the red knob here until our plates meet. And you can see them coming together there, and just like that, they are together and we are done. And once you get those two plates together like that, you can tighten up your black set knob again. At this point now, we need to adjust our miter bar for the slot of our router table. And we've separated it from the jig, and we have these nylon bushings that need to be adjusted. So for that, you just take a 3/32 Allen key and just adjust these miter slots until you get a nice snug fit, but a snug fit that glides well in the track. You don't want it to be jamming and being tight. So I'm going to adjust these, and then we can move on with setting up the rest of the jig. Well, this miter bar here is actually set at the factory for being square, but it is adjustable through these two machine screws here. And at this point, I would feel more comfortable, and you might too, if we just use our square and just check it to make sure that this miter plate is square to your router table slot. Now this one is fine, but if you need to adjust it, you loosen these two screws, adjust it to square, and then tighten them back down. Once you're happy with the whole adjustment of the miter bar, you just want to take your jig and install it on the miter bar. And for that, we have these little button head screws here. I'm using a 1/8 inch Allen key, or a T-wrench in my case. And we're just going to tighten this down, but you don't want to crank it just yet, because what we need to do is we need to slide it back and forth until the tall window, or the tall cutout of your aluminum fence, is lined up centered with the collet of our router table. Now, in order to get proper alignment, I personally would remove this fence, and we'll just make sure that we're nicely lined up. You can see this tall cutout right here, and we just want this to be perfectly in line with our collet. All right, so once you get that lined up and you're happy with the alignment of it, hold it tight against the miter bar and then tighten down these two set screws. Now that we have it aligned, we're going to put our stock ledges or our stock supports into our track here, just loosely for now. And as well, we're going to put our backer board that we removed to get a clear view of our slot. We're going to put that in place as well and just tighten it down. We're going to be doing some adjustments at one point in time here, so how tight this is doesn't matter right now. We'll now put the blade guards in place, and we just need to line them up from left to right. And the best way to do that at this point is to remove the jig out of the miter slots and have a look at the underside of your jig. And what you want to do is you want to line up your slots. Let me just show you here. Your tall slots of your miter guards or your blade guards should be lined up with the tall slots of your jig, and that way you're not getting your router bit cutting into your blade guards. So we'll adjust these, and once we get them all lined up and we're happy with the alignment, then we can move on to our next step. Well, our next step is to adjust our pin plates in reference to our cutter. And what I have installed here is a double flute 1/4 inch straight cutting bit. And we're just going to slide our entire assembly just forward until our pin plates here are adjacent of our cutter. And holding our red knob, we're going to rotate our silver knob until it reaches the edge of our router bit. And you just want it to barely touch. Now you're going to have to rotate that bit just to make sure that it is just barely touching. You don't want it to be tight up against it, but you just want it to, as they call it, just kiss that plate here with your router bit. So keep rotating it until you get the right alignment and it's just barely touching that bit. Now that you have these pin plates just kissing that router bit, with this knob here, your set knob still loose, rotate your red knob clockwise until you get a distance from the edge plate here to your bit of about 1/8 of an inch. You're going to notice that these plates start to separate. Don't worry about that. They're designed to do it. Once you get about 1/8 of an inch gap between the plate and your bit, and you're happy with that gap, just tighten down this lock knob here for a second. The next step now is to align these stock ledges. And for that, we need to use a Phillips screwdriver. We're going to loosen our set screws here that are along our track, and we're going to slide our stock ledges until we're about 1/8 of an inch from that router bit, from the cutter. And once you get that in place, just tighten down your ledges. So do that for both the left and the right side. On the side here where our pins are, you're going to slide this stock tray or stock ledge to be about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the pins. We now want to set the height of the cutter, and for this project, for this demonstration, I'm using some 1/2 inch ply. So we're just going to raise our router bit until it is just slightly, and I mean ever so slightly, above our stock, and that will give us a good clean joint. So just raise and lower until you're just ever so slightly above that test stock that you're going to use. And once you're happy with the height of it, then we will leave it at that, and our bit height is set. And we now want to put our blade guards back in place. we're going to use some scrap stock of the same size or dimension that we're using to make our box or our test cuts. We're going to make sure that our tall groove here in our guard is lined up with our bit, and we're just going to tighten it down ever so slightly. We just want a little bit of friction here to help hold this. We don't want this clamped in so tight that you can't move it side to side. So adjust your fence, and now we can move on. Now I'm going to tell you that at this point in time, it's a good idea to get down here at eye level and just look through the large hole that's in your guards and just make sure that you've got clearance for that router bit all the way through so that you're not making contact with your fence. You should do this on the table saw as well, just to make sure you're not cutting up the aluminum extrusion. So you now want your stock to do your test cuts to get your final calibration of this jig. And all I'm using is 1/2 inch thick ply, as you saw when I was setting the height of the cutter. And I've cut it to 2 inches wide, and they're 5 1/4 inches long. So now it's time to do some test cutting. So in order to make your first test cut, take your stock, slide it in behind your blade guard, and get it up so that it's tight up to the edge of those pins. Those pins would be the ones that we adjusted earlier to get them 1/8 of an inch away from the blade. Once you get that set, clamp your piece in place and then turn on the router and make your first cut. Now that you've made your first cut, we need to adjust those pin plates. I'm just going to remove this guard so that you can get a better view of what I'm doing here. And all I'm going to do is place this test cut piece down over our pins. We're going to loosen our black locking knob here, and then we're going to rotate our red knob until our pins are a nice tight fit. Now you want a little bit of friction going into that joint, just like that. Yeah, that's good. And once you get a good fit with that, we're going to tighten down our lock knob again. You just want to test it to make sure that it is a good fit. You want a little bit of resistance, but you don't want it too super tight. You don't want to have to be fighting with it. Once you get that adjusted, you can put your guard back in place. Well, now that you have those pins adjusted, it's just time to finish routing our piece. So you will take this groove that you cut, place it over top of those pins, and make the pass. And then move it over one, and make the pass. Move it over one, make the pass. So let's get this one routed. Now, once you get all the pieces routed, you want to place it down so that the first notch you cut is over top of your adjustment pins or your alignment pins. From there, take another piece of your stock, lay it down right beside, and once you get it nicely aligned and tight beside the other one, clamp it down and make a pass. From there, the process is exactly the same as what you used when you routed this piece. Just keep moving it over notch by notch until you finish routing the whole side. Well, now that you've finished those pieces, you'll test the fit. And if your fit is too tight and you need a looser fit, you're going to want to release your black set knob that's on the top of your jig. You're going to want to hold this red knob and you're going to want to loosen this silver knob. So if you need a looser jig, or sorry, a looser joint, you turn it to the left. If you have a tighter joint, or you need a tighter joint, you turn it to the right. So you'll make those adjustments, lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. You'll make those adjustments on your joints until you're happy with the way that they fit. Well, I finished routing this small little project, and once it was done, I realized I didn't film the actual cutting of the little box. And the reason for that, I guess I kind of figured I already did it on the table saw demonstration. But just for giggles, I'll explain the process here. You mark the top of each piece with a pencil line across your stock. Once you get that done, you place your stock with your pencil line up against your teeth, and you make a pass with your router. Now, in the setup, you saw that sometimes I used a clamp and sometimes I didn't. Way better with the clamp. The router likes to pull it out of alignment, so you really want to get a clamp on there to help hold it in place. So you make that first pass, and then you move it over on your teeth and you make the second pass, etc., all the way to the end of the board until you're finished. Then you want to turn the board around, place that first notch that you cut over top of your teeth, take your new board with the line in it, make the lines meet, and once they do, clamp it down, remove your first piece if you like, or you can leave it in for support, and make that cut. Make that first pass. Once you get that done, then you will move it over subsequently and make another pass and another pass, and it will continue until you get all of the joints done. You'll continue with that process, and once you're finished with that, then you will have your 4 pieces. You basically put all of the lines on the same side of the box and join them together. And if you've gone through and adjusted your jig properly and you're happy with the fit, you'll end up with something like this. And there you have it. The setup for the INCRA I-box finger jointing jig on a router table. Now guys, this setup, truth be told, isn't much different than the table saw setup. The main thing here is, of course, having to rotate the bit to do that kiss the blade sort of thing. And other than that, the setup is pretty much the same. But I wanted to show you that it is possible and that you can do it. Truth be told, plywood is not the best choice here when it comes to the router table. There was a lot of tear out, and I ended up having to keep repositioning that backboard to give some support so that it wasn't destroying the plywood. I eventually got it done and was happy with the results. Other than that, there isn't much to tell. I would definitely be using a clamp holding the boards every time you route on this, which does slow down the process a little bit, but nothing serious. Guys, I hope you're going to give this a try. I hope if you've been considering this jig but haven't gotten it because you don't have a dado blade, maybe this might make it interesting enough for you to try it on your router table. Depends on what you want to do with it. Guys, I want to thank you for joining me again this week. I hope you've enjoyed today's show, and I'm going to see you again next week with yet another woodworking video.